Good evening all, and welcome. Before we start, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who saw my previous video and helped my really good friend Briefcase to try and fix the issue he's going through. Hopefully, with your support, we can get it resolved. Thank you, everyone. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Let's set the background first. I grew up in a very rural area. My parents have a pretty big piece of land with a nice 2-story farmhouse in the middle of it. To the south of the house is a peach orchard. The west is where the driveway is. It goes through an alley of cottonwood and pecan trees, but the land is pretty open and was used for cattle farming. The east and north is dense woodland and shrubs, which reaches all the way to our neighbors about 2 miles. Back then, I was working at a carpenter shop in town. I had just gotten my driver's license, and so I was able to get there on my own. It was about an hour-and-a-half drive, though. We started fairly late in the day at about 10 a.m. The owner of the company was sort of a night owl and loved to sleep in, but because of that, we had to stay until 9 p.m. That was no problem in the summer, but turned out to be a bit of a nuisance in the winter, as it got dark pretty early, and I hated driving in the dark because the lights on my car weren't the best anymore. I drove a 1987 Chevy pickup, which had obviously seen better days. I hadn't had much money back then, so this was all I could afford. So one day in late December, about 10 or 11 years ago, I left work much later than usual. I'd made a pretty stupid mistake on a nightstand I was building for a customer and needed to fix it. As the customer was going to pick it up the next day, when I finally finished, it was about midnight. I cussed out my own stupidity, closed the shop up tight, and went to my car. There are 2 routes I can take to get home. One is on a highway, the other one is through the backcountry, and dirt roads surrounded by thick brush and trees. I usually took the highway, as it was much faster and safer, especially in the dark. But this day, there had been an accident, and the highway was blocked by emergency services, so I took the long way home. As soon as I left the main road and made my way up the dirt trails, I got this feeling, you know the one, as if something bad is about to happen, almost like impending doom. The longer I drove on the road, the stronger the feeling got, until it felt like all of my body and soul were aching desperately to turn around, drive back all the way to the roadblock, and wait until it got opened again. I tried to suppress it as best I could, and tried to convince myself that I had driven this route many times, and I knew that it was safe, albeit a bit rough on the truck. When I was driving through an especially rugged piece of brush only about 10 miles from my parents' farm, all of a sudden, my left front tire popped. I did my best to keep the truck on the road and made it to a safe spot. I kept a spare tire in the toolbox and had changed tires quite a lot on my own, and I knew it would be just a minor inconvenience and I would be rolling again in a matter of minutes. That's where I was wrong. I climbed up on the truck's bed, only to find that my toolbox had been broken into, and all of my tools and my spare tire had been stolen. So there I was, still miles away from the nearest settlement, in bear and wolf country, in the middle of the night with no cell phone and no way to repair my truck. I always kept a sort of survival kit in my toolbox with a blanket, a small axe, a fire starter kit, and some MREs. But it had been stolen too. Thank God I still had my trusty pucko, which my sister gave me when she moved to Finland. So I made the second, but bigger mistake on the day. I decided to walk home. To this day, I still don't know why I made this decision. All I had to do was wait in my truck until sunrise, and I knew a neighbor was driving this road every day at around 8 a.m. He could have taken me to town and called my parents to get the truck, but some stupid fart in my brain said, "Nah, we're walking." So I went. I locked the car, took my rucksack with my belongings with me, and began walking. I couldn't have walked far when I got this eerie feeling, like something or somebody is watching me. I turned around, but nothing was there. I picked up my pace to make it out, when all of a sudden I heard some rustling in the bushes to my left. I called out, "If there's someone there," but of course received no answer. The feeling of being watched got stronger and stronger as the rustling became more frequent, when suddenly the brush stopped and I came to a small clearing. That's when he spoke to me for the first time. "Hey there, boy." He had a pretty weird pronunciation. The first part was spoken softly, almost gently, but the boy was like an explosion in my ears. He made a tiny pause in between and then spewed out boy. He was big, 6'6", wearing a long trench coat and hat. Grey, short hair with lifeless eyes, almost like that of a perished fish. But what really scared me was his dog. He had a huge, black, shepherd-like dog, but it looked very wild, almost like a wolf. I immediately froze with fear. I always heard this term, but could never imagine it being like this. I couldn't move. I just couldn't. I tried, trust me, God, did I try. "What you doing there, boy?" he asked. "Don't you want to talk to me, boy?" I still couldn't move a finger, but my mouth slowly started to work again. I told him about the truck and how I was trying to walk home, but I don't think he was able to understand a word that I was saying, as I was stuttering and slurring the words due to fear. He made few steps towards me, his dog fixated on me like prey. He came so close that I could smell him, a very odd smell, a bit like old cigarettes, but there was something else that I couldn't point out. I still stood there unable to move. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, almost like he wanted to remember the smell of fear radiating from me. He started to grin, not a genuine, honest grin, but the one where the eyes aren't involved. They stayed as lifeless as they were. "Be careful out here, boy. There's a lot of dangerous things out here, boy," he said, and vanished into the brush as suddenly as he had appeared. I started to thaw up and was able to move my body again. All of a sudden, my knees felt weak and wouldn't bear the weight of my body anymore. I collapsed to the ground and my whole body began to shake uncontrollably, and I began to sob with relief. As soon as I had regained control over my body again, I ran like I never did before and never have again, all the way home, which was quite a long way. I can't describe the feeling of relief coming over me when I saw the all-so-familiar porch lights coming up in the distance, and I reached the edge of the woodlands on our property. "Hey there, boy." My heart skipped a beat. I screamed from sheer terror and knew that this would be the end. So, I didn't stop running. I ran and ran and ran and never even bothered to look back. Only when I reached the warm yellow circles of light cast by our porch lamps did I dare look back. He stood there on the edge of the woods, like he did on the clearing, his animal on a leash next to him. He grinned this creepy grin again. I fumbled out my keys as my parents locked the back door at 8. I unlocked the door and stumbled in. Only when I had locked the door I started to feel remotely safe again. I went upstairs to my room and made sure that all the windows were locked on my way up. When I looked out the window, he was gone. I told my dad about this when we got into the truck the next day. He said this was likely Samuel, an old hermit who had a small cottage down there in the woods, who had been living there for at least 30 years, but that he had never seen him with his own eyes. So in retrospect, perhaps I was never in grave danger. Maybe. But nevertheless, to the strange creep in the woods, I'd rather not meet you again. Last summer, my boyfriend and I were camping somewhat remotely in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, Presidential Range. The sites are well off the beaten path, not a campground, no water or electric, and a tents only. Sites are half a mile to a mile apart, very deeply wooded and isolated. Without a vehicle, you'd have an hour or so to walk to the nearest road. In spite of this, it's still a known area and frequented by campers and hikers, but it's still New Hampshire, so it's already very weird. Over the course of the summer, we made 4 trips to the same area. The last time was the most remote, with no restrooms. We used the woods. While most people take the general trail, as you can tell where others have been, it really ruins my outdoor pooping experience, so I prefer to find my own new path. In doing so, I wandered a fair distance from our tent site through heavy woods, stopping at the edge of a big thicket of skinny pine trees. I could not have felt further away from civilization or people, and crouching down, thought to myself, as much as any of the animals that must be around me and I couldn't see. It wasn't eerie, but rather hypnotic, just me and nature. I felt anything or anyone could be watching me, and I would never know. Right in front of me as I crouched down, I saw something strange. Out of place were 2 pine trees that had been roughly chopped to about stump size. They're skinny young trees, the types that break easily and can be pushed out of the ground in cold or mushy weather. Each stump was wrapped near the top with grey duct tape, and a lot of it. My immediate thought was something was tied up there, and then the trees were chopped rather than unwrapping the tape. But why? And what? What could have been held there? This was not the end of the trail. It was really in the middle of nowhere. Someone else would have found it the same way I had. There would not be room for a vehicle, or an ORV, or dirt bike. This was someone in the woods. Mort tied something up to these 2 trees using a lot of tape. Suddenly I felt the density of where I was, and that I was within yelling distance of my boyfriend and our tent site, but wasn't alarmed. I could see it wasn't new, but the tape also wasn't faded or worn. I looked around the ground nearby and didn't see anything else with tape or signs that something had possibly been built there. It simply looked like something was tied between 2 trees with duct tape, and for some reason the trees cut at the top above the wrapping, leaving 2 stumps somewhat resembling torches in the ground. Not burned, but that's the best way to describe the appearance. It's important to note, this would not have been used for hanging food or meat. If a person had been tied there, it would have been in a sitting position, and the tape was low to the ground, not high. I took my boyfriend back there later to show him, and we both agreed we couldn't come up with an explanation, other than someone tied up something between those trees. But what, I wonder, and more importantly, Why? I was 16 at the time, and at a small hunting camp near the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. The camp has a fairly large pond when you drive in. The camp itself is in one large circle with a couple of branching roads. When you come in, you can go straight and sit up by some old growth pine with nothing growing at the bottom, and nestled in is a little shack. To the left will take you by the pond, and you can continue onto the road and circle up to the mountain where it links with the other road. I have a place on this side about 2.5 miles from the pond. At about 10 p.m. one night, I decided I wanted to go camp fishing, so I loaded up my four-wheeler with tackle, a road mining hat with a light, and a hatchet for any snakes, and drove down to the pond on the rocky dirt road. I get down there about 10:30, and my first line is out. When I'm at the wooded area to my right, that's as thick as blackberry bushes with a path cut through to another fishing spot, the road to my left and back down is a little dip. I fished for about an hour and a half, only catching one small fish when I felt eyes on me and heard a branch snap. Now I've been in the woods my whole life at this point, so I grabbed my hatchet and set it in my lap and keep an eye in the woods, what little bit I could with how thick it was, thinking it was at worst a coyote or black bear. About 30 uneasy minutes pass, never really feeling the eyes leave me. Then suddenly the air was thinned and everything felt normal. About 10 more minutes pass, and I hear a loud skittering and then a thud coming from the direction of the old pine growth. Thinking one of the drunks out there had gotten out and fell, I got up and make my way over to the bank, past the little shed into the old growth, scanning back and forth with my light mounted to the hard hat when it happened. In the very edge of the light was a pale humanoid figure on all fours. Its eyes darted to mine. We locked eyes, it being in the edge of the light. I didn't get a good look, but I froze in complete terror, knowing that if I turned my back to it and run, it might react like a cougar and pounce. I readied the hatchet to defend myself and took a step back. It took one equal in distance to mine towards me. This continued down the bank, it stopping at the top to gaze down at me. Without taking my eyes off it, or turning my back to it, I turned on the four-wheeler, angled the lights to it, and after I do that, I packed my stuff, not turning my back, and hopped on. I floored the four-wheeler at it, making it back up, and tore down the road to the left, hitting 30 to 40 down the road I normally take at 15. I look over my shoulder and see this thing running on all fours beside me. This went on for about half a mile until it stopped, crawled into the middle of the road and watched me drive off. I get to camp as fast as I possibly can, load up my weapon in the corner of my room, and don't dare sleep that night. The moral of the story, don't turn your back and run from the unknown unless they come at you first, and never go catfishing alone. A few years ago, my boyfriend worked in a warehouse that was out in the middle of nowhere, in between railroad tracks and the river. On one side of the warehouse, there was dense forest. He had gotten done at work around 8 p.m., right as the sun was setting. He was sitting outside waiting for his ride and talking to me on the phone. The conversation was normal until I heard his tone change. My boyfriend doesn't want to show much emotion at all, but I could instantly tell something was wrong. I asked what was going on, and he explained that he thought he heard a baby crying from inside the woods. Now, I probably would have second-guessed and thought he was joking around because that's his personality, but the way he was talking, I could tell he was serious. The cries went on for a while, and he said that they eventually turned into wails, and it didn't sound like it was too far. He disconnected our call much to my dismay and sent me an audio recording of what he was hearing. Sure as hell it was the sound of a baby. He told me he was tempted to go into the woods and try to find the source of the sound, and I begged him not to. Something didn't feel right. Thankfully, his ride came to get him before he could step into the forest. I've heard these kind of stories before, and many say that it's something or someone in the forest trying to lure people with the sounds of a baby crying. But I can't wrap my head around it. It honestly gives me chills when I think about it to this day. Even my boyfriend doesn't talk about it much because it genuinely freaked him out. I guess I'm just curious to see what you all make of it. I'm a 25-year-old, and even though these events happened 11 years ago, I still remember them very clearly. This is by far the creepiest thing I've ever experienced. When I was 14, my family and I moved out of town into a small house situated right in the middle of a cane field. There was a dirt road that led from the main road to the front of our house, and the sides and back were surrounded by cane. I was what my parents called a fitness freak, because exercise was my thing. So I took my dog, Jet, and went jogging early mornings and late afternoons every single day. Because we had just moved to this house, and it being surrounded by cane and all, I had to find a new track to continue my routine. Our house was 2 stories high, and my bedroom window faced the front of our house so I could see the main road. After finally moving in my stuff and setting up my bedroom at the new house, I noticed from my window that there was a little dirt road on the side of the main road. Perfect, I thought. It was about 5:30 in the afternoon, the usual time I would go for my jog, so I would go and check it out. The road was long and narrow, fitting no more than 1 car, as there were rows of cane on either sides that stood tall and well above my head. I had been jogging for about 15 minutes, and looking back, I could no longer see the main road as this track was straight, but then slightly curved, leading me up towards another house. I could only see the roof of this house in the distance, as the cane was still very high. As I got closer, I noticed a little boy in a red shirt sitting on the top of her roof. He looked about 5 or 6. That's weird, I thought. I remember thinking, how on earth did he climb up there? And if his parents knew he was there, because not only is the roof visible over the cane, as it was obviously a 2-story home. So I stopped jogging and called my dog back, who was running a few meters ahead of me, and turned around to go back. I wasn't interested in going all the way up to the house, just in case I'd be trespassing on private property, or if they had dogs, as mine didn't get on with other pets very well. When I got home, my dad was sitting on the couch watching TV. I asked him if he knew the family who lived up on the opposite dirt road. Nah, no one lives up there, he told me. Well, there must be someone who lives there, I say. I just saw a little boy sitting on the roof. My dad looked at me and lowered his eyebrows as if he didn't believe me. No, Tori. No one lives there. It used to be an old workhouse that farmers used to store their tractors and working equipment in. I was so confused, questioning whether I had just imagined a little boy sitting up there. My 12-year-old sister then walked out the bathroom drying her hair with her towel. Gemma, come jogging with me in the morning? Why? Because I need to see if I'm just imagining something. Okay. First thing in the morning, I dragged Gemma to come along. We left the dog at home just in case there really were people living there. So, what were you imagining? Yesterday, I went jogging on this road, and down the end was a house with a little boy sitting on the roof. So, Dad is saying that no one lives there, and it's bothering me. We get close enough to where the roof was finally visible, and there was no little boy in sight. Let's go all the way in then, Gemma said, and I hesitantly followed. When we got there, it became pretty clear that there couldn't possibly be anyone living there. To try and describe it as best I can, it was a large 2-story house covered in black streaks, as if it had been burnt down once before, and had 3 large square gaps on the front that clearly used to be windows. The stairs to get inside were at the back of the house, and behind that was a small murky-coloured lake. It seemed definitely abandoned, and like it hadn't been used in many years. My dad was right about it being once used as a storage place for farmers. Around the yard were old tires, tractors and cars. In all honesty, the whole place was straight up creepy. This is going to sound weird, but do you have a bad feeling? Gemma looked at me for a moment before agreeing. Tori? Is that the little boy? She said, her voice shaking. Before I got a chance to answer where, Gemma was pointing towards a small room downstairs with a smashed hole in the window. Through the window, there was a little boy sitting there. We both stared in shock for at least another second before bolting back down the road. We got home, bursted through the door, telling Mum and Dad what we'd seen. Dad laughed. I told you girls no one lives there. I was getting frustrated. Dad, seriously, Gemma saw him too. They both brushed it off and didn't think much of it. Being dumb teenagers and all. Gemma and I decided to go back in the afternoon to the house with the dog. When we got back there, we checked where we had seen the boy in the morning, but he was gone. Jet was going crazy. We unclipped his leash from his collar and he took off running behind the house and the upstairs. We called out to him, but he wasn't coming back. Great. Now we have to go get him. We walked around the back and started slowly walking upstairs. They were old, rickety, and creaking with every step. Gemma got up the stairs before me, because admittedly I was scared, and I was only halfway up before Gemma called out, "Oh my god, Tori, you have to see this." I walked straight in as the front door was missing and I had chills. On the dusty old floorboards was kids' crayon scribbles and a small blue shoe. If only Dad could see this. I immediately wanted to leave, but Gemma was still calling out to Jet and he hadn't returned. We walked through the kitchen and into an open room of the house and found Jet sitting there staring at a large cardboard box that was at least a meter tall. We looked inside, and it was full to the brim of blank videotapes. Every part of me was screaming to get out. Gemma looked at me and slowly reached in to grab a tape when we heard quick and heavy footsteps coming from the front of the house, exactly as if someone was running towards us. We both panicked and got the hell out of there. It was late in the afternoon, and it was starting to get dark. It started pouring with rain as we were running away, and as we got further down the road we looked back, seeing a few shapes of large men standing in the gaps of the windows watching us. When we got home we were sweaty, and so far out of breath trying to explain to Mum and Dad what we had seen. Videotapes? That's weird, Dad said. Mum wasn't so interested, so she chose not to believe us. We explained that when Gemma tried to pick up a tape, we heard what sounded like someone coming towards us, even though it was now dark outside. My dad suggested he would go for a drive to the house and have a look. For some reason, even though Gemma and I were absolutely scared out of our minds, we decided to go with him. We drove up slowly through the dirt road as it was dark and eerie, and all we could see was the gravel of the road directly in front of the car, where the headlights shone. We pulled up at the house, thinking it was scary enough during the day, but it was like going to a horror movie during the night. We sat in the car with the headlights shining directly onto the old, creepy house, and darkness surrounding elsewhere. My dad, Gemma and I almost jumped out of our skin, and I swear for a second that my heart stopped beating. It was the sound of a gunshot. It sounded like it was shot no more than a few meters from our car. At that moment, Dad immediately put the car into reverse and spun it around, about to drive off when he just stopped still. My heart was about to beat out my chest and I yelled, "Dad, what are you doing?" Gemma was almost crying in the front seat. I looked at both of them, and they were both doing nothing but staring directly in front of the car. So this thing I noticed on the way there was, since it had rained a bit earlier, there were no tracks or anything marked on the road, since they were washing away by the rain. So our tire tracks were the only ones. Then I saw it. Sitting perfectly upright on top of our tire tracks was a bullet shell. It's safe to say we never came back to that house, as it's quite obvious we were not wanted there. I began jogging on a track from the back of our house, and have had a much better experience. But still to this day, so many questions remain in my head. I wonder what the hell would have been on those tapes, why there was an entire box full of them, who did they belong to, and why were they being so protected? My aunt, my brother, my cousin, and I were visiting our grandparents' house in Washington. They lived in a pretty remote area with only a handful of other houses around and a good chunk of forest between each of them. Keep in mind, it also is kind of an island, so they don't get many funky creatures there. My aunt and I went out while it was dark outside, just walking the path into the forest and trying to figure out what was making a loud noise. Anywho, we passed a pond area and made our way to a clearing. When we reached said clearing, I started immediately getting a bad feeling. I figure, it's dark and I'm quite scared of the dark and I'm tired, but nothing's really gonna happen. The path was a bit overgrown around there, so we decided to turn around. Right before we did though, I caught a glimpse of what could have been a really big owl up in the trees just staring at us. Now I'm an Arizona girl, so I don't know what creatures are normal in this forest, but this thing just didn't feel right to me. It gave me a weird vibe. But my aunt kept walking, and I caught up. Keep in mind the path was very short. It only takes about 10-ish minutes to get to the clearing and 10 to walk back. But when we approached the house, we heard my grandma yelling for us. We run back, and she is anxious, saying we've been gone for hours. We swear we'd only been there for half an hour at most. And when my brother and cousin come back, they tell us they'd been out looking for us. We check the time. They're right. Another interesting thing that could be connected, a few days before that, we had heard some really funky noises coming from the woods while we were out there making s'mores. Even my grandparents, who had lived there longer than I've been alive, admit that it was unlike anything they had heard before. It continued getting closer and closer, and stopped any time someone tried to get a video of it. Eventually I had to go inside because it was freaking me out so bad. That loss of time though still gets to me, especially considering that I don't have an explanation. Was it the owl or the woods? I guess I'll never know. When I was working as a backpacking guide in Western North Carolina, my schedule dictated a full 8-day shift with 6 days off. During those 6 days, myself and other co-workers would play in the woods. In the summer, you couldn't beat a mountain swimming hole. One of my favorites was called Paradise Falls, alternatively named Wolf Creek Falls. This is a cliff jumping spot with a huge swimming area, a tiny slot canyon, and an inner pool. Most will venture to do the small jump into the inner pool. Even though it's the smallest jump, it's arguably the least accessible. Even though the jump is 9 feet at most, you must work through a 10-minute rock scramble to get to the top of it. We were all venturing in, and from inside the tiny canyon you can't see the main pool. Well, we got to the jump and coaxed the first person off. a fellow guide who had never been to the spot before. She jumped successfully and swam out into the main pool and beach area, and then she screamed. Because she was now out of sight, myself and another guide jumped in together and swam the short distance to her with the others in tow. Of course, we figured she was somehow injured. She was treading water and just staring wide-eyed at the riverbank. When I looked to the shore, there stood a man. He was massively large, easily 6'6" with a little change. He wore beat-up overalls and no shirt, and there didn't appear to be a hair on him. Perhaps the most disturbing thing was that he had folds of skin all over his body. Imagine the Michelin Man but made of flesh. His face, his arms, chest, everything had a uniformed layer of shingled fat rolls, and he was brandishing a firearm. The area around Wolf Creek is just holler after holler, but there are a few residences, and those few have been there for generations, propagated by the same families. These people don't like outsiders, and so they keep relations within the family. I could only surmise that this individual was the product of inbreeding over decades. He just stood there and watched as we scrambled to grab anything important and shoved it in the bag. He just stood there and watched as we hightailed it out of that basin and back towards the parking area. The whole time, he never said a word. Bear in mind, it's public land. This happened a number of years ago. I was working in a rundown factory that had long since been abandoned, but we had been paid to make sure that no trespassers got onto the property. We had to do rounds every once in a while, and I have to admit, I had slacked the last few hours and written everything off as fine. It was a tiresome job. It was starting to get light outside, and I could see streams of sunlight start to make their way up past the horizon. This was always a good sign, as it meant my shift would be over soon. At 7 a.m, sweet freedom awaited me. So I thought in order to just finish off the books, I'd do one final round of the facility. It takes about 15 minutes to go around, which in fairness isn't very much, but it's just a bit of an annoying walk due to there being debris and things you have to climb over occasionally if you don't take the longer route round. I grab my flashlight and walk out as it's still quite dark and do the usual route, looking around. Keep in mind I'd been doing this job for about a year now, and nothing at all remotely creepy had ever happened. About 8 minutes into the walk, roughly halfway, I'm just minding my own business, looking around, when I hear what sounds like footsteps. I instantly shine my flashlight up to the second level of the factory. I can't see anything, but the footsteps are loud, like they're hitting metal. Now, the floor of the factory is definitely not metal, so I found this quite peculiar. I shout out to whoever's there to reveal themselves so they don't face prosecution charges, but I don't hear anyone. I know at this point I'm going to have to go in, so I grab my key and slot it into the nearest door and make my way up. I climb the stairs, which echo loudly with the sound of my feet hitting them. I knew that this would scare whoever was there, as they usually need to run down these stairs to exit, as the other side is quite far away, and depending on what they know about the factory, means that I have the advantage here. I make my way up, trying to corner my prey, listening out to see who's there, and there isn't anyone. No noise can be heard. I do a whole run of the floor above and floor below, and no one to be found. It took me about an hour to clear everything. I was quite shocked, but I assumed that they had gotten away last minute, lock the door and write it off as that, and try and find where they could have breached, but couldn't find the location. I make it back and start searching the video security footage to see where they could have come in from. When I get up the second floor, roughly at the time I was there, I scroll through the images, and although I can hear a brief bang, the one that alerted me originally, I still couldn't find the origin of the sound. It left me puzzled, and when my relief came, I tried not to dwell on it and went home. Still, it's one of the weirdest things that happened, and none of my other co-workers have said to experience anything similar before or since. I heard it on the tapes, so I know it's real. I wonder what it could have been. Some 20-odd years ago, I was reconnecting with a family member. Said family member lived way up in the hills of North Carolina and had given me directions to his house. I was driving my vehicle and my sister was in hers, following behind. We each had CB radios so we could communicate on the way. We're driving, and I took what I thought was the correct road, and the dirt road immediately climbed to a very steep incline. We slowly made our way up and around this road, and it comes out at a dead end. At the end was an old run-down house with a huge front porch. On the porch was a plethora of things such as an old ironing board leaning against a window, crates of soda pop bottles and a few feed bags. An older gentleman was sitting in a rocker and had a long rifle sitting across his lap. To his left was, I assume, his wife, and she had one of those old-timey wash tubs at her feet and was washing clothes. Then there were several barefoot and no-shirt kids running around. They had stopped when we pulled up at the house, and there were of course several hound dogs laying around. Every one of them just stopped and was staring at us. I slowly rolled down my window and said very politely, "Excuse me, sir, I think we took a wrong turn." He slowly was rocking in his chair with both hands on his firearm and just said one word, "Yep." I picked up the CB radio mic, told my sister, back up now, and we backed all the way back down to the highway. One of the most surreal things I've ever experienced. It was almost like we drove back in time or something. In my little town, there's a twice the ice station. Basically, you can fill up water jugs and 5 gallons and get ice bags for cheaper than you can in the grocery store. I went out a few nights ago to get some water, because who wants to be drinking tap water? My husband was home, and because I'm kind of heavily pregnant, he insisted that he go instead. I wish he would have. It was 1 a.m, dark for miles and in the middle of nowhere. As I exit my vehicle, I open the back seat up, get the gallon jugs and close the door. As soon as I do, a dark blue truck pulls up perpendicular to me, presumably so I couldn't get out if I decided to get back in my car. Alarm bells start going off, and the bells start screaming at me when the slide door opens and 2 quite large men step out. It's about 20-foot distance between them and me, so I do the first thing I think of. I pull out my phone and answer a phone call from my husband and answered with, "Hey honey, yeah, I'm almost home." As soon as they see me answer, one of the guys says, "Ah," and they both get back in their car and peel out the lot, tires squealing and all. I throw my unfilled jugs back into my car and lock all the doors 1,000,000 times or more before I broke down to call him for real. I told him to write down the make and model of the car, color, and that we'd go to the police station in the morning. About 2 days later, there was breaking news of a pregnant woman that went missing. She had been taken, as her father had sworn up and down that she wouldn't just leave. I know it was the men in the blue van, and I've told the police all I know. I don't know if they targeted me because I was a woman all alone in the middle of nowhere, but deep down, I think it was because I was pregnant, and I don't want to think about what would have happened to me or my baby. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's videos and I'd like to apologize for the lack of content in the last few days. It's been challenging. So on Monday we had the video with Lady White Rabbit. On Tuesday there was nothing. I thought I'd take that day as my day off. I know it's usually Saturday, but I really was quite exhausted. And then on Wednesday, yesterday, Briefcase got demonetized and I spent most of the day on the phone to him, messaging other creators. I'm really grateful to Lazy Masquerade for replying to me and trying to help me as well. And Don't Turn Around. Really lovely guy. He really helped me out. He gave us a lot of tips, which I gave to Briefcase, and we worked through them. And then today we launched his Twitter campaign. He didn't even have Twitter. I think he's got 1,000 followers now, which is pretty good. And thank you. And I tweeted and I really just tried to make as much noise as possible. So YouTube actually replied, by the way. That's really good news. They said they'd look into it. So now we just got to see what happens. Hopefully we get the green light soon and everything will go back to normal. Here's to hoping. But yeah, we're really happy that things are hopefully on the mend and they'll be better. In any case, it was a very stressful day yesterday and part of today, but now that they replied, I do feel a lot better and a lot more at ease. Anyway, I think I'm going to have a pizza. I think I deserve it. Hope everyone's good. And just thank you for being patient, bearing with me. And yeah, there'll be fresh content until next Saturday, 100%, maybe even longer. Maybe I'll even work next Saturday just to make up for it. I'm not going to miss any videos this week, maybe not even next. So sorry about everything. But just, I'm really grateful for you guys. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you to the lovely patrons whose names are on screen. For real, thank you all. But I'm going to leave you now. So stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.